Nobody. The banker at the back of the clubhouse closed his leather folder and stood. Mrs. Whitmore, before you say that again, you may want to know who Mr. Cole is. 70 people went silent so fast I could hear rain tapping against the tall windows behind me. Deborah Whitmore froze beneath the projector light, one hand still wrapped around the microphone. She wore the same uniform I had seen every time she wanted the room to understand who was in charge. Tailored pink blazer, white blouse, black heels polished enough to reflect the fluorescent lights. 30 seconds earlier, she had been smiling. Nathan Cole is a nobody who moved into Cedar Ridge 3 weeks ago, she had announced. He has no position on this board, no financial authority, and no understanding of how this association operates. A few people had laughed. I hadn't. I sat in the last row wearing a faded work jacket, muddy boots, and jeans that still carried sawdust from the porch railing I had repaired that morning. On the table beside Deborah sat a stack of financial reports. In my hand was a single letter bearing her signature. I had read that letter so many times I could almost see the words without opening it. Free and clear. Deborah looked toward the banker. And you are? Richard Hayes. First Commonwealth Bank. That name changed the air in the room. Deborah's attorney leaned toward her and whispered something I couldn't hear. Her expression tightened. Richard opened his folder. There are several matters concerning the Cedar Ridge Community Center financing that need clarification. There is no financing, Deborah said immediately. That obligation was resolved years ago. Richard stopped turning pages. I watched him look at her the way accountants look at numbers that refuse to add up. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, that is precisely what we need to discuss. Deborah turned toward me. For the first time that evening, there was uncertainty behind her eyes. She thought I had brought him. I hadn't. She thought I had spent 3 weeks trying to embarrass her. I hadn't done that either. All I had done was ask one question she should have been able to answer. But to understand why a bank representative was standing inside Cedar Ridge while its HOA president insisted a multimillion-dollar debt didn't exist, you have to go back 23 days, to the afternoon Deborah first saw my truck and decided exactly what kind of man I was. My Ford F-150 was 12 years old, dark blue under a permanent layer of road dust, with a dent above the passenger side wheel that I had stopped noticing years ago. I pulled into Cedar Ridge Estates at 3:16 on a Tuesday afternoon with 2 toolboxes in the bed and a coffee thermos rolling around on the floorboard. The neighborhood looked engineered to offend gravity. Perfect lawns, stone mailboxes, white fences, maples trimmed into identical shapes. My new house set near the western edge, a brick 2-story with a loose porch railing and a mailbox leaning 6 degrees toward the street. I had been tightening the railing for maybe 15 minutes when a white Lexus stopped at the curb. Deborah stepped out. Pink blazer, white blouse, black heels. She looked at my truck first, then my tools, then me. Contractors have to register with the association office, she said. I tightened the last bolt. Good to know. Who hired you? I stood and wiped my hand on my jeans. I did. Her eyes narrowed. You're the new owner? Nathan Cole. I offered my hand. She glanced at the grease on my fingers and chose not to take it. Deborah Whitmore, HOA president. Nice to meet you. She studied the railing. Exterior modifications require architectural approval. I tightened for existing bolts. Rules still apply here, Mr. Cole. I'm sure they do. She smiled then, but there was nothing warm in it. You'll learn. She returned to her Lexus. I watched it disappear around the landscaped corner, then finished repairing the railing. On my kitchen counter, the welcome packet waited beneath a pile of closing papers. That night, I opened it while eating takeout from the carton. Covenants, pool rules, landscaping standards, annual budget. Then I reached a glossy page announcing a proposed emergency assessment, $9,800 per household for renovations to the Cedar Ridge Community Center. One sentence caught my attention. The association's debt-free community center represents our strongest shared asset. I stopped chewing. Debt-free. Beneath the page was a financial summary. I looked at one number for 3 seconds longer than I should have. Then I turned back and read it again. Because people can lie with speeches, titles, even confidence. Numbers are harder. And one number in Deborah Whitmore's welcome packet had just told me something she didn't know I was qualified to notice. The number was $4.6 million. It appeared once in the financial summary, buried beneath a line labeled Historical Capital Financing, then vanished from every page that followed. No outstanding balance. No lender listed. No payoff date. Just $4. 6 million appearing like a footprint that ended in the middle of the road. I set my takeout aside and pulled the HOA packet closer. The community center had been built 11 years earlier. Stone entrance, fitness rooms, indoor pool, conference hall, commercial kitchen. The packet repeatedly described it as debt-free. Maybe it was. Loans get paid. Records get released. Nothing suspicious about that. But if Cedar Ridge had retired $6 million in financing, there should have been a clean trail from borrowed money to final payment. I couldn't find one. So I did what Deborah apparently believed people with muddy boots didn't know how to do. I kept reading. The next morning, I walked to the community center. Sprinklers hissed across perfect grass. Inside, the lobby smelled like coffee and chlorine from the pool. Deborah stood behind a folding table arranging documents for new residents. She looked at my work jacket, then at me. Mr. Cole, another repair without approval. Not today. I placed the financial packet on the table. I have a question. Her smile tightened. Of course you do. I opened to the assessment notice. $9,800 per household. What exactly is it funding? Necessary modernization. The packet says roof systems, HVAC, pool equipment, and reserves. Correct. And the community center is debt-free? She gave me the patient expression people use when explaining something to a child. Completely. When was the original financing retired? That stopped her for half a second. Years ago. Which year? I'd have to check. Who was the lender? Mr. Cole, why does that matter? Because the packet references $6 million in historical financing. She closed the folder between us. People like you don't understand institutional finance. There it was. Not shouted. Not angry. Somehow that made it worse. People like me? I asked. Her eyes flicked toward my jacket. Homeowners without board experience. These arrangements are complicated. I nodded. Then help me understand. The board has already reviewed everything. Great. Is there a recorded release? Her expression changed again. Smaller this time. What? If financing was secured or otherwise documented against association assets, I'd like to see whatever confirms the obligation was satisfied. You've lived here less than a week. 6 days. Exactly. Yet you're already questioning financial decisions made by volunteers who have served this community for years. I'm questioning one sentence in a packet asking me for $9,800. A man walking toward the gym slowed down. Deborah noticed. She lowered her voice. The community center is owned free and clear. That is the board's position. Board's position. Interesting phrase. Can I get the supporting records? Submit a written request. I will. I left without arguing. That afternoon, I wrote a short email requesting the financing history, lender information, payoff documentation, and records supporting the emergency assessment. No accusations. No threats. Just documents. Deborah responded 47 minutes later. Your request is excessive and appears designed to disrupt association operations. The board will determine which materials, if any, are appropriate for homeowner review. I read it twice, then created a folder on my laptop labeled Cedar Ridge. Her email became document number 1. 2 days later, document number 2 appeared taped to my front door. Architectural violation notice. Unauthorized exterior alteration. Front porch railing. Fine, $250. I stood there staring at it while the railing I had altered remained exactly where the builder had installed it. I had tightened 4 bolts. My neighbor, a retired teacher named Susan Parker, was watering flowers next door. She saw the notice in my hand. Deborah, she asked. Apparently. Susan sighed. You asked about the assessment, didn't you? I looked at her. How do you know? Because that's what happens when people ask too many questions. She went back to watering, then added, last year it was Mark Henderson. Before him, the Carsons. What did they ask? Susan looked toward the street before answering. Where the money goes. That night, I searched county filings and public records connected to the community center. Most were ordinary. Permits. Construction notices. Property descriptions. Then, just before midnight, I found a financing reference tied to First Commonwealth Bank. The identifier was old, but recognizable. I copied it onto a yellow legal pad. Loan reference. Recording date. Original amount. 3 pieces of information. I stared at them for a long time. Deborah had told me the debt disappeared years ago. Public records didn't prove she was lying. Not yet. They only gave me another question. But there was something Deborah couldn't possibly know about the man she had dismissed as a nobody with a pickup truck. I had spent 25 years reading numbers exactly like these. And the more I looked at Cedar Ridge's numbers, the less they looked finished. Deborah's first mistake was calling me ignorant. Her second was putting it in writing. 3 mornings after I found the first Commonwealth reference, an email arrived from the HOA office at 7:42. My records request had been denied. Deborah wrote that the association had already provided homeowners with all materially relevant financial information, and that repeated requests could constitute harassment of volunteer board members. Attached beneath her signature was another notice. My porch railing fine had increased from $250 to $500 because I had failed to correct the unauthorized modification. I walked outside with coffee in one hand and stared at the railing. For original bolts. Same wood. Same paint. Nothing added. Nothing removed. A lawn crew buzzed somewhere down the street, and sprinklers clicked rhythmically across Susan Parker's yard. 500 now. Susan called from her porch. I held up the notice. Apparently my wrench is destroying property values. She laughed, but only for a second. That's how Deborah works. Does nobody challenge her? People do. Susan lowered her voice. Then they get tired. That sentence explained more about Cedar Ridge than the entire welcome packet. Deborah didn't need everyone to agree with her. She just needed questioning her to become more exhausting than paying whatever appeared in the mailbox. That evening, I attended my first regular HOA board meeting. The community center conference room was cold enough to make the air conditioning vents whistle. About 30 homeowners sat in rows beneath recessed lights. Deborah occupied the center chair at the front table. Pink blazer, white blouse, black heels crossed neatly beneath her. When public comments opened, I stood. Nathan Cole, 1847, West Briar Lane. Deborah didn't look pleased. 3 minutes. I'm requesting clarification on the emergency assessment. Your written request has been addressed. It was denied. Then you have your answer. A few people shifted in their chairs. I held up the glossy assessment notice. This document describes the community center as debt-free. Correct. Was the original $4.6 million financing fully retired? Yes. When? Years ago. Was First Commonwealth Bank the lender? Her eyes changed. Just slightly. Charles Danner, the HOA attorney sitting beside her, turned his head. Where did you get that name? Deborah asked. Public records. Mr. Cole, this isn't an interrogation. It's one question, and I answered it. Not that one. Charles leaned toward his microphone. Mr. Cole, loan relationships can involve confidential documents. I'm not asking for confidential underwriting. I'm asking whether First Commonwealth was connected to the financing. Deborah interrupted. You're out of your depth. There were those words again. I waited. She smiled toward the audience. Mr. Cole moved here recently and apparently believes finding an old filing on the internet makes him a financial expert. A few nervous laughs came from the back row. I never said I was an expert, I replied. Good, Deborah said. Because people like you see a number and invent a conspiracy. What kind of people? The room went quiet. She looked at my faded jacket, then my boots. People without institutional experience. I nodded slowly. Then this should be easy. What was the payoff date? Charles touched Deborah's arm. She ignored him. The center is owned free and clear. Was there a recorded satisfaction or release? Yes. Can homeowners see it? No further questions. She struck the gavel. Hard. The crack echoed through the room. I sat down. I didn't argue. I didn't reveal that for 25 years I had evaluated distressed commercial assets, negotiated restructurings, and read loan documents thick enough to stop doors. Deborah wanted the room to believe I was a handyman who had discovered Google. I was comfortable letting her believe it too. The next morning, I received 3 more violation notices. Trash container visible from street. Mailbox color allegedly non-compliant. Work vehicle parked overnight in driveway. My Ford F-150 was the work vehicle. I photographed everything, saved every notice, and added them to the Cedar Ridge folder. Then I returned to the public filings. That was when 3 numbers began bothering me. The original financing, for $6 million. The renovation reserve referenced in the assessment packet, $1. $2 million. The debt reported to homeowners, 0. Any one of those numbers could be legitimate. Together, they needed explanation. So I wrote Deborah one final question. Does Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association currently owe any money arising from, secured by, or otherwise associated with the community center financing? I removed every unnecessary word before sending it. No accusations. No theories. Just a question that could be answered yes or no. Deborah replied the following afternoon. One sentence. No, Cedar Ridge HOA has no outstanding obligation associated with the community center financing. Beneath it sat her full signature block. I printed the email. The printer hummed beside me as the page slid into the tray. I read the sentence once, then again. After that, I placed it inside a fresh folder and wrote one word across the tab, representation. Because Deborah still thought the dangerous thing in Cedar Ridge was the nobody asking questions. She hadn't realized the dangerous thing was the answer she had just signed her name beneath. The call came at 6:14 the next morning, before the coffee had finished dripping into the pot. My phone vibrated across the kitchen counter, and one name on the screen made me forget about breakfast. Laura Bennett, General Counsel, Cole Meridian Holdings. I answered. You're up early. So are you, she said. Nathan, where did you get the loan identifier you sent me last night? I looked toward the yellow legal pad beside my laptop. Public filing connected to my HOA's community center. Silence. Not normal silence. The kind that means someone is opening another screen. Say the association name again. Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association. Keyboard clicks. And you live there? For 9 days. Of course you do. I almost smiled. Laura had worked with me for 14 years. She knew trouble had a habit of finding me after I stopped looking for it. What did you find? That identifier is familiar because it's in the North Valley portfolio. My hand stopped halfway to the coffee pot. The portfolio we acquired? Closed 11 weeks ago. I pulled out a chair and sat down. Cole Meridian Holdings had spent 25 years buying, restructuring, and managing commercial assets. I founded the company at 23 with a rented office, 2 folding desks, and more confidence than money. By 48, I had stepped away from daily operations, but I still held controlling ownership. The North Valley transaction was exactly the kind of acquisition I no longer reviewed line by line. Hundreds of loan positions and related interests could move inside a portfolio that size. Cedar Ridge is in it? I asked. Something associated with the community center financing appears to be. I'm not giving you a legal conclusion before we pull the complete file. Good. What's happening? I slid Deborah's printed email across the table even though Laura couldn't see it. The HOA president says there's no outstanding obligation associated with the center. Another pause. In writing. Signed email. Send it to me. Already scanned. Nathan, listen carefully. You live there personally, and you control Cole Meridian. Those roles need to stay separated. Agreed. Do not contact the servicer yourself. Do not threaten the board. Do not tell anyone you own their loan. We don't know the servicing structure, collateral position, current balance, or what rights transferred. That was why Laura was good. She could drain the drama out of a room before anyone created a lawsuit. I want the file reviewed through normal channels, I said, and I want myself removed from any operational decision involving Cedar Ridge. I'll document that. One more thing. Don't assume Deborah lied. Laura went quiet. You have an email saying zero obligation. I have an email saying what she believes or wants me to believe. Maybe the records changed. Maybe there was refinancing. Maybe the portfolio data is stale. Verify first. Understood. We hung up. I finally poured the coffee. Outside, morning sunlight hit the hood of my old Ford while a landscaping truck rolled past. Nothing about Cedar Ridge looked different. But the question had changed. Until that call, I was a homeowner asking why 3 numbers didn't match. Now I knew my company might be sitting economically on the opposite side of the financing Deborah insisted no longer existed. I could have called her immediately. I didn't. Hidden authority is only useful when you understand its limits. Mine did not let me walk into the clubhouse and take keys. It did not let me threaten foreclosure. It did not make me the bank. It gave Cole Meridian contractual interests that lawyers, servicers, and loan documents would define, not my ego. At 9:03, Deborah sent another community-wide email. The subject line read, "Important clarification regarding misinformation." She wrote that certain newer residents were spreading confusion about the community center and reassured homeowners that Cedar Ridge owned the facility, free and clear of any outstanding financing obligations. This time she sent it to all 312 homes. I leaned back and stared at the screen. She had turned one private representation into a public one without me saying a word. At 10:27, Laura called again. Her voice had changed. We found the servicing file. I stood. And I'm still waiting on counsel to confirm the current documents. But Nathan, the obligation did not simply disappear. I looked at Deborah's email glowing on my laptop. Balance. Not over the phone yet. Fair. There's more. The file contains correspondence from Cedar Ridge leadership within the last 2 years. That landed harder than the balance. Who signed it? We're verifying. Laura. I know. I walked to the window. Across the street, Susan was collecting her newspaper. Farther down, a mother pushed a stroller beneath perfectly trimmed maples. 312 households had just been told there was nothing to worry about. Follow the documents, I said. No assumptions. That's the plan. After we disconnected, I printed Deborah's community-wide email and placed it behind the first one in the representation folder. 2 signatures. 2 statements. Same claim. She still thought she was winning an argument against a nobody. What she didn't know was that the question was no longer whether I understood her financing. The people who actually serviced it had just opened the file. The first document that mattered wasn't Deborah's email. It was a letter she had signed 18 months earlier. Laura called me at 4:26 Friday afternoon while I was replacing a cracked sprinkler head beside my driveway. Water sprayed across my boots as I reached for the phone. We verified the servicing records, she said. I shut off the valve. How bad? Don't use that word yet. Fair. I sat on the curb. What do we know? Paper moved on her end. The community center financing originated at $4.6 million. The obligation was modified twice. The servicing file reflects a substantial balance still outstanding. So Deborah's zero is wrong. Based on the current records we've reviewed, yes. Current balance? Laura gave me the figure. I stared at the wet concrete between my boots. It wasn't a rounding error. It wasn't a forgotten administrative fee. Cedar Ridge still had a 7-figure obligation associated with financing Deborah had twice described as non-existent. Does Cole Meridian service it? No. Third-party servicer. That matters. And collateral? Still under review. Don't make assumptions. I won't. Laura paused. Now the interesting part. Remember I told you the file contained correspondence from Cedar Ridge leadership? Yeah. We verified one signature. I already knew before she said it. Deborah. Deborah Whitmore, acting as HOA president. I stood slowly. What did she sign? An acknowledgement connected to the most recent modification. 18 months ago, the neighborhood suddenly felt too quiet. Somewhere behind Susan's house, a lawn mower shut off, meaning she knew an obligation existed. It means she signed a document acknowledging terms associated with it. Let counsel characterize what that proves. Laura was right. Words mattered. Send everything through the proper channel, I said. Not to me personally. Already doing that. And the emergency assessment? That's where this gets complicated. The servicer wants clarification on several representations in recent association materials. Because the homeowners were told debt-free. Among other things. I looked toward the community center roof, visible above the trees. Follow the money. Don't assume theft. Nathan, I was going to tell you the same thing. After we hung up, I went inside and opened the Cedar Ridge folder. Deborah's first email sat on top. No outstanding obligation. Behind it, her community-wide message. Free and clear of any outstanding financing obligations. I didn't add Laura's information. That belonged in a different process now. Monday morning, Deborah added something herself. A printed notice appeared at every mailbox announcing a special community meeting for the following Saturday. Financial misinformation and community stability. I almost admired the wording. By noon, residents were talking about it in driveways. Susan walked over while I was unloading lumber from my truck. She says somebody is trying to scare homeowners about the community center. Does she say who? Susan gave me a look. Do you really need to ask? At 2:18, another email arrived from Deborah. Mr. Cole, your continued inquiries are creating unnecessary concern. You are directed to cease representing that Cedar Ridge has outstanding community center debt. I read it carefully. Then I replied with one sentence. Please identify any statement in which I represented that to another homeowner. She never answered. Because I hadn't. I hadn't told Susan. I hadn't posted online. I hadn't spoken at the pool or emailed the neighborhood. Every public claim about the debt had come from Deborah. Wednesday evening, I found her waiting beside my driveway when I came home. White Lexus at the curb, pink blazer, white blouse, black heels. She held a folder against her chest. We need to settle this. Settle what? Your campaign against the board. I don't have a campaign. You're digging through records you don't understand. Then explain them. Her jaw tightened. The community center belongs to Cedar Ridge. I never said it didn't. And there is no debt homeowners need to concern themselves with. Interesting wording. That's different from saying there's no outstanding obligation. Don't play semantic games with me. I'm using your words. She stepped closer. You think because you found some old bank reference you can walk in here and challenge people who built this community? I asked for records. You're nobody here, Nathan. She said my first name like it was a warning. No board seat. No committee position. No influence. You're a man with an old truck who moved in 2 weeks ago. I looked past her at the Ford in my driveway. That about covers it. She seemed irritated that I wasn't offended. Then she pulled a document from her folder. Sign this. It was an acknowledgement stating that I had received clarification from the HOA and accepted that the community center was owned free and clear. I read the first paragraph and handed it back. No, why? Because I don't sign statements I can't verify. You're making a mistake. Maybe. She turned toward her Lexus. Saturday, 7 o'clock. I suggest you attend the meeting so this can finally be put to rest. I watched her drive away. 10 minutes later, Laura called. The servicer has requested a formal clarification meeting with Cedar Ridge representatives. When? Saturday. I looked toward the corner where Deborah's Lexus had disappeared. At 7, Laura went silent. How did you know? I picked up Deborah's and signed acknowledgement from where she had left it on my workbench. For weeks, she had treated paperwork like a weapon because she assumed nobody would ever read it closely enough to fight back. Now the bank records, her old signature, her new statements, and 312 homeowners were all heading toward the same room. And Deborah still thought Saturday's meeting was hers. Saturday arrived smelling like rain and fresh asphalt. By 6:38 that evening, cars were already lining both sides of Cedar Ridge Boulevard, and the community center parking lot had overflowed onto the grass. I parked my old Ford near the back, exactly where I always did. Through the tall clubhouse windows, I could see homeowners filling rows of folding chairs. Deborah had wanted an audience. She got one. I entered carrying nothing but the representation folder. The lobby smelled like burnt coffee, wet jackets, and chlorine drifting from the indoor pool. At the front of the conference room, Deborah stood beneath the projector screen in her pink blazer and black heels, arranging papers with the concentration of someone preparing a prosecution. Charles Danner sat beside her. Two unfamiliar men occupied chairs near the back. One had a leather folder stamped First Commonwealth Bank. Deborah saw me notice him and smiled. That told me something immediately. She thought the bank was there for her. Mr. Cole, she called across the room. Glad you decided to come. Wouldn't miss it. Susan had saved me a seat in the last row. She's been telling everyone the bank is here to confirm what she said. She whispered. Did they tell her that? No idea. I sat down. At exactly 7, Deborah struck the gavel. This special meeting has been called because misinformation regarding one of Cedar Ridge's most valuable assets has created unnecessary anxiety. Her eyes found me. Tonight we're putting that misinformation to rest. The projector illuminated a photograph of the community center. Beneath it, owned free and clear by Cedar Ridge. Deborah spent 10 minutes describing the building's history, renovations, and value. Then she displayed the emergency assessment. $9,800 per household. This assessment has nothing to do with debt, she said. There is no community center debt. A homeowner raised his hand. Then why is First Commonwealth here? Deborah smiled toward the man with the leather folder. Because I requested that appropriate financial representatives be present so certain individuals can stop spreading irresponsible speculation. Richard Hayes didn't smile back. Charles leaned toward Deborah and whispered something. She waved him away. Before we hear from our guests, she continued, I want the source of this disruption addressed. There it was. She called my name. I stood. Mr. Cole has lived here approximately 3 weeks and has already generated repeated records demands, challenged board authority, and questioned financial matters he does not understand. I asked whether an obligation existed. I said. And you were answered. Yes. I lifted the folder slightly. Twice. Her mouth tightened. Yet you continued digging through irrelevant public filings. Public filings are public. A few homeowners laughed softly. Deborah's face hardened. This is exactly the behavior I mean. You have no standing beyond that of any other homeowner. I never claimed otherwise. You have no board position. Correct. No committee authority. Correct. No financial role in this association. Correct. Each answer seemed to irritate her more. She stepped away from the table. Click, click, click. Her heels sounded sharp against the tile. Then stop pretending your questions carry special weight. I said nothing. That silence pushed her where arguing never could. You're nobody here, Mr. Cole. The room went still. Deborah gestured toward my faded jacket. You moved into this community with an old pickup truck and immediately decided you knew more than professionals who have managed Cedar Ridge for years. Charles whispered, Deborah. She ignored him. Nobody elected you. Nobody appointed you. Nobody asked you to investigate us. At the back of the room, Richard Hayes closed his leather folder. The sound was small. Almost nothing. But I had heard that exact sound 23 days earlier in the moment my memory kept returning to. He stood. Nobody. Deborah turned. Richard adjusted his jacket. Mrs. Whitmore, before you say that again, you may want to know who Mr. Cole is. The room shifted toward him. Deborah gave a short laugh. I'm sorry. Richard Hayes, First Commonwealth Bank. I'm here with Michael Grant from the loan servicing team. The second man stood. We were asked to attend because several representations regarding the Cedar Ridge Community Center financing require clarification. Deborah's smile weakened. There is no financing. Richard opened the folder again. Our records do not support that statement. Somebody behind me inhaled sharply. Deborah looked at Charles. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at the documents in Richard's hands. That's impossible, she said. Richard placed several pages on the table. There is an outstanding 7-figure obligation associated with the financing structure. The precise rights and servicing arrangements are governed by the underlying documents, but the obligation did not disappear. Murmurs rolled across the room. Deborah pointed toward me. He put you up to this. No, Richard said. Mr. Cole has been screened from operational decisions concerning this matter. Her hand stopped. Screened from what decisions? Richard looked toward me, then back at her. Cole Meridian Holdings acquired the portfolio containing the relevant financial interest 11 weeks ago. Deborah stared at him, then at me. Cole Meridian? I stood in the last row, muddy work boots planted beneath a chair that suddenly felt very visible. Richard answered for me. Nathan Cole is its founder and controlling owner. The room went silent again. Deborah had spent 3 weeks trying to prove I was nobody. The bank had needed less than 30 seconds to explain why that had never mattered. Deborah didn't look at me after Richard Hayes said my name. She looked at my boots. Mud dried along the leather from the sprinkler repair I had finished the day before. Then her eyes moved to my faded work jacket. As if somewhere between the zipper and the frayed cuff, she might find proof the banker had made a mistake. That's ridiculous, she said. Richard remained standing. Which part? He lives here. Yes. He drives that old truck. A murmur moved through the room. Richard glanced toward me. I'm not familiar with Mr. Cole's vehicle. Someone laughed. Deborah didn't. Cole Meridian doesn't own Cedar Ridge, Charles Danner said quickly. No one said it does, Richard replied. And this meeting should not be interpreted as an enforcement action or a determination concerning collateral rights. We are here because the servicing records conflict with representations being made about the financing. That distinction mattered. I stayed in the last row. I wasn't there to pretend my company could seize the community center with a phone call. Contracts didn't work that way. Neither did banks. Deborah gripped the edge of the table. The loan was satisfied. Michael Grant from the servicing team opened a second folder. Mrs. Whitmore, do you remember signing a modification acknowledgement 18 months ago? The color in her face changed. Charles turned toward her. Deborah. Michael placed a copy on the table. We have a document bearing your signature as HOA president. Deborah didn't touch it. I signed hundreds of documents. This one specifically references the outstanding obligation. The room erupted into whispers. A man in the third row called out, How much do we owe? Another voice followed. Why were we told 0? Deborah struck the gavel. Order. Nobody listened. The sound of 70 homeowners asking questions at once filled the clubhouse. Richard raised one hand. Please, we are not here to speculate about wrongdoing. We are here to reconcile the association's representations with the servicing records. I respected that sentence. No accusations. No theater. Just two versions of reality that couldn't both be correct. Deborah finally looked at me. You knew? Not when I moved here. You bought into this community because of the loan. No, you planned this. Deborah, I bought a house because I liked the maple trees and the western lot. It sounded almost stupid in that room, which was why it was true. I didn't recognize the loan until I read your packet. Then you used your company against us. Laura's warning echoed in my head. Separate roles. Document everything. Don't retaliate. I removed myself from operational decisions as soon as the connection was confirmed. Richard nodded. That is correct. Deborah stared at him. Then why is he here? Because he's a homeowner, Susan said from beside me. That landed harder than anything I could have said. Deborah turned toward the projector. Her slide still read "Owned free and clear by Cedar Ridge." The words suddenly looked enormous. I opened the representation folder and removed 2 pages. Deborah. She didn't answer. You told me privately there was no outstanding obligation. I held up the first email. Then you told all 312 households the same thing. I held up the second. Were those statements based on records you reviewed? Charles stood. Nathan, I think further questions should go through counsel. Fine. I placed both pages on the empty table near the aisle. They're already in writing. Michael looked toward Richard, then opened another document. There's an additional issue we need the board to clarify. Deborah's eyes snapped toward him. What issue? The emergency assessment. The room quieted again. What about it? Recent association materials describe the $9,800 assessment as exclusively related to modernization and reserves. It is. The servicing file contains correspondence referencing potential use of association funds in connection with financing obligations. Charles stopped moving. Deborah's face went rigid. Richard immediately added, that does not establish misuse. We are asking for reconciliation and supporting records. There is nothing to reconcile, Deborah said. Then providing the records should resolve it, I replied. She looked at me with something different now. Not contempt. Fear mixed with anger. You think you're powerful because your name is on some company? No, I stood and zipped my jacket. I think signatures matter. Her eyes flicked toward the modification acknowledgement on the table. For 3 weeks, Deborah had treated my questions like an attack on her authority. But authority wasn't what was collapsing in that room. Certainty was. The homeowners had been told one thing. The servicing records showed another. And somewhere between those two versions sat a $9,800 assessment nobody could explain cleanly anymore. Richard gathered his papers. The servicer will issue a formal records request to Association Counsel. Until the review is complete, nobody should draw conclusions beyond what the documents establish. Deborah reached for the gavel again, but Charles quietly put his hand over it. Don't, he whispered. She stopped. That was the first moment I understood the balance had actually shifted. Not when the bank identified me. Not when everyone learned about Cole Meridian. It shifted when Deborah's own attorney stopped helping her control the room. As homeowners surrounded the board table demanding statements, payoff records, and meeting minutes, I walked toward the exit. Susan followed me into the lobby. Where are you going? Home. You're leaving now? Through the doors behind us, I could still hear Deborah trying to answer 6 questions at once. The bank opened the file, I said. Now we let the records talk. Outside, rain had started again. It tapped softly against the hood of my old Ford. For the first time since I moved into Cedar Ridge, nobody laughed at the truck. By Monday morning, Deborah's biggest problem wasn't the bank. It was 312 homeowners who had learned how to ask the same question at the same time. My inbox started filling before sunrise. Some messages were polite. Others weren't. People wanted to know whether the community center had debt, what the $9,800 assessment was actually for, and why the board had repeatedly described the property as free and clear. I answered none of the financial questions. I wasn't the board, the servicer, or the auditor. Being connected to the portfolio didn't make me entitled to invent answers before the records did. At 8:31, Charles Danner sent a community-wide notice announcing that the board had retained an independent accounting firm to review the assessment and community center financing. Until that review was complete, collection of the emergency assessment would be suspended. I read that sentence twice. Suspended, not canceled. Important difference. At 10:06, another email arrived. Deborah's name wasn't on it. The vice president, Martin Keller, announced that all future communications concerning the financial review would come through counsel. Susan knocked on my door 15 minutes later. She's gone. No, then why isn't she sending emails? Probably because her attorney discovered the mute button. Susan laughed so hard she had to put down her coffee. I didn't. Not because I felt sorry for Deborah. Because I knew this was the dangerous point in any dispute. The moment everyone wants the ending before the evidence is finished. Tuesday afternoon, Laura called. The servicer received records from Cedar Ridge. Complete. We don't know yet. Anything important? Enough that nobody should be making public conclusions. That sounds like lawyer for yes. That sounds like lawyer for stop asking. I smiled. Fair. She continued. The association's internal materials appear to use inconsistent descriptions of the community center obligation. Some documents acknowledge financing. Others describe the property as debt-free. And the assessment? Still being reviewed. There are references to liquidity pressure and upcoming payment requirements, but we do not yet know how the board intended to allocate the assessment. So no theft allegation. Correct. And Nathan? Yeah. Keep saying that. I did. When neighbors stopped me beside the mailbox, I told them the same thing. Wait for the review. When somebody posted online that Deborah had stolen millions, I refused to repeat it. I had seen careers destroyed by people confusing discrepancy with proof. I wanted Deborah held responsible for what the documents established, not for whatever made the best rumor. Thursday evening, the board held another meeting. Deborah attended, but she wasn't holding the microphone. She sat at the far end of the table, pink blazer buttoned tightly, hands folded over a yellow legal pad. Martin Keller chaired the meeting. Charles sat between them. The room was packed again. Martin began with one announcement. The independent review has identified material inconsistencies requiring further investigation. Nobody spoke. The outstanding financing obligation associated with the community center should have been disclosed more clearly in recent homeowner communications. Deborah's head lifted. That language is prejudicial. Charles leaned toward her. Let him finish. Martin continued. The board has also confirmed that the statement describing the center as free and clear of all outstanding financing obligations was inaccurate. There it was. Not shouted. Not dramatized. Just inaccurate. One word capable of undoing 3 weeks of certainty. Deborah grabbed her microphone. That statement reflected my understanding of the structure. A homeowner called from the second row. Then why did you sign the modification 18 months ago? The room stirred. Deborah's lips parted, but Charles spoke first. That document is part of the ongoing review. Another homeowner stood. What about the $9,800? Martin looked down at his notes. Collection remains suspended. The accounting review has not established that assessment funds were misappropriated. It has established that the stated purpose requires reconciliation with internal financial planning documents. Deborah turned toward him. You're making this sound criminal. I said nothing criminal. His voice stayed level. I said the explanations don't match. That sentence silenced her. I sat in the same last row chair as before. Nobody introduced me. Nobody needed to. Halfway through the meeting, Deborah finally looked back. This is what you wanted. I shook my head. No, you wanted me humiliated. I wanted an answer to a financing question. You could have told me who you were. Would you have answered differently? She didn't respond. That was the question beneath everything. If my title had been necessary for her to treat a homeowner honestly, then my title wasn't the problem. Her judgment was. Martin announced that Deborah had temporarily relinquished authority over financial communications pending completion of the review. She stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. I built this community. Susan spoke from 3 seats beside me. No, Deborah. We did. Deborah stared at her, then at the room. For the first time, nobody looked intimidated. After the meeting, I walked outside into cool night air. My Ford sat beneath a maple tree, still dented above the passenger wheel. On the windshield was a white envelope. For half a second, I expected another violation notice. Instead, it contained a photocopy of an old board memorandum. No name, no message, just one paragraph highlighted in yellow. President Whitmore recommends describing the community center as debt-free for homeowner communications while financing obligations remain within the association's broader capital structure. I read it under the parking lot light. Then I read the date. 2 years earlier. Deborah hadn't merely repeated a misunderstanding after I arrived. Someone had documented the wording before I ever bought my house. I folded the page carefully and called Charles. You're going to want to preserve another record. Because the bank had already exposed that Deborah's claim was wrong. This document raised the harder question, whether she had known it was wrong when she made it. The board memorandum didn't end Deborah Whitmore's presidency. Her own signature did. 3 weeks after I found that highlighted page beneath my windshield, Cedar Ridge held the quietest meeting I had attended since moving there. No projector, no speeches, no gavel cracking against wood. Just 78 homeowners, 5 board members, 2 attorneys, and a stack of documents nobody could dismiss anymore. Rain had stopped an hour earlier, leaving the community center windows streaked with water. I sat in the last row wearing the same faded work jacket Deborah had mocked the first night. My Ford was parked outside beneath the same maple tree. Some things didn't need upgrading. Martin Keller opened the meeting. The independent financial review is substantially complete. Deborah sat at the far end of the board table. Pink blazer, white blouse, black heels motionless beneath her chair. Martin continued. The review confirmed an outstanding financing obligation associated with the community center. It also confirmed that multiple homeowner communications inaccurately described the facility as free and clear of all financing obligations. Nobody reacted. We already knew that part. Then Martin turned a page. The review also located board materials showing that the distinction between ownership and outstanding financing had been discussed before those communications were issued. Deborah leaned toward her microphone. That language is misleading. Charles Danner quietly moved the microphone away from her. Let him finish. Martin explained that the $9,800 emergency assessment had not been proven stolen, diverted, or criminally misused. That mattered. The review did, however, conclude that homeowners had not received a sufficiently accurate explanation of the association's financial position or the pressures influencing the proposed assessment. Collection remained suspended. A revised financial plan would require homeowner disclosure and independent review. Then came the document. The memorandum from 2 years earlier appeared on the screen. President Whitmore recommends describing the community center as debt-free for homeowner communications while financing obligations remain within the association's broader capital structure. Deborah stared at it. That was shorthand. A homeowner asked, shorthand for what? The building itself was an association asset. Nobody asked whether we owned the building, Susan said. You told us we didn't owe money on it. Deborah looked toward me. This entire spectacle began because he decided to target me. I stayed seated. Nathan, Martin said. Do you want to respond? No, Deborah almost laughed. Of course not. I changed my mind. I stood. Actually, one thing. The room turned toward me. I asked whether an obligation existed. Deborah told me no. I asked for records. She fined me for tightening my porch railing. I asked again. She told 312 households the community center was free and clear. I opened the representation folder. I didn't write these statements. I placed her 2 emails on the table. She did. Deborah's face tightened. You hid who you were. I told you my name the first day we met. You knew I didn't know about Cole Meridian. That shouldn't have mattered. Silence. If I needed to own a financial company before you would answer me honestly, then the problem was never my resume. I sat down. That was the last thing I said at the meeting. The board handled the rest. Under Cedar Ridge's bylaws, the directors voted to remove Deborah from the presidency and financial oversight responsibilities. Whatever other governance steps followed would happen through the association's procedures, not through me. Nobody handcuffed her. Nobody escorted her from the building. Real consequences rarely arrive with sirens. Deborah gathered her papers slowly. When she stood, her heels made the same sharp click I remembered from my driveway weeks earlier. This time nobody moved out of her way. For months later, Cedar Ridge looked almost exactly the same. The community center remained open. Kids still ran dripping from the pool. Susan still watered her flowers too early in the morning. My mailbox remained the same color, and every violation Deborah had issued against me had been withdrawn after review. More importantly, The association adopted a restructuring plan negotiated through the appropriate servicing and legal channels. Cole Meridian's involvement stayed separated from my role as a homeowner. The emergency assessment was replaced with a revised funding plan after residents received actual numbers instead of slogans. Nobody lost the community center. That had never been my goal. One Friday afternoon, Laura mailed me the photocopy of Deborah's first signed statement from my file. No outstanding obligation associated with the community center financing. I stood over the shredder in my home office and fed the page into the slot. The motor buzzed. Her signature disappeared first. Then the sentence. Then the word obligation. I didn't need a trophy. Outside, sunlight reflected from the dent above my Ford's passenger wheel. I thought about the afternoon Deborah had looked at that truck, looked at my dirty hands, and decided she knew my value. She believed power announced itself with titles, microphones, polished shoes, and a seat at the front of the room. I had spent 25 years learning something different. Power is knowing when not to use it. Authority is knowing where it ends. And justice isn't making someone smaller because they once called you nobody. It's giving the truth enough time to become impossible to ignore. Deborah thought the loudest person controlled Cedar Ridge. In the end, the bank didn't expose her with an accusation. It exposed her with records. And records have one advantage over people like Deborah Whitmore. They don't care who looks important. They only remember who signed the paper.